Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to dive back into a little bit of history that doesn't make a lot of sense. History that has been hidden. History of an area that appeared to be developed for hundreds of years before European settlers arrived to the area, only for this location to then be destroyed repeatedly through different events that led to the overall hiding of any sort of architecture that may have existed in this area. Today, we're going to be looking at Virginia. More specifically, we're going to be diving deep into the Chesapeake Bay, looking at the city of Norfolk. The land along the Chesapeake Bay has comprised for centuries numerous cities which played a significant role to the overall development and even the founding of America. For what makes a better location for your largest settlements than areas which had already been developed? Norfolk, Virginia is today the third most populated city in all of Virginia and also holds the distinct rank of being the 100th most populated city in all of America. However, throughout history, Norfolk was a much larger tract of land, which also included the second largest city in Virginia today, Chesapeake. Prior to 1607 and the founding of the land that today makes up Norfolk, we are told that most of the Chesapeake Bay was under the domain of the Chesapeake Indigenous people, whom the name Chesapeake derives from. This tidbit ties very nicely into some of my other research I've shared with you regarding the Susquehannock Indigenous people who went extinct by the year 1763. In my hundreds of hours of poring over Susquehannock history, we've established that for the better part of 500 years, if not longer, the Susquehannock dominated the lands along the Susquehanna River, which now bears their name. This river, stretching well over 400 miles from New York through Pennsylvania and emptying into the Chesapeake Bay, is the longest river in America without commercial traffic, and was considered, for a time, to be the westernmost expanse of European settlement. As the stories go from the 17th century, everything west of the Susquehanna River was Susquehannock land, and this would have included at the time the reaches of Norfolk, Virginia. The Susquehannock are indeed showcased on some of the first maps of Virginia and were described by Captain John Smith as unique in their demeanor and monumental in their stature, standing between 6 and 7 feet tall. Other prominent features Smith noted were light-colored hair and eyes, which he described as appearing European, and Smith also was taken to a large fortress constructed along the Chesapeake Bay by the Susquehannock, which Smith claimed was built upon a large earthwork. This fortress not only appeared to have many advanced defensive features according to Smith, but it was also reinforced with palisaded wooden walls. And the most remarkable aspect noted by John Smith might have been the bronze tools, ornaments, and weaponry in possession of the Susquehannock, which included a large bronze cannon. As this is the earliest history of indigenous interaction in the Chesapeake and the current narrative, we must take it with a grain of salt. But the mystery that's associated with the indigenous people of the Chesapeake Bay is nothing to scoff at. Indeed, if we dive into the Susquehannock, numerous facets of their narrative claim they were in sole control of the massive kingdom in the Chesapeake Bay. And yet, if we dive into the currently accepted narrative of the Chesapeake Bay, the major cities that were founded within, there is almost zero mention in those histories of the Susquehannock anywhere. One of the only examples I was able to find was within a snippet addressing the prehistory of Norfolk, which claimed that the earliest inhabitants encountered by the Europeans were the Chesapeake or Chesapeake people, who in 1607 had just displaced an even larger indigenous group from the bay and then took over their settlements. To me, this appears to be yet another form of plausible deniability weaved into the modern understanding of the history. While the Susquehannock were said to be an Iroquois-speaking people, I've also shown you evidence that the Susquehannock only appeared to have amalgamated with the Iroquois in the 16th or 17th centuries. By all estimates, this joining of the two tribes occurred at the King and Queen Seat Rock Formation in Upper Maryland. Here, it is written that the Prince of the Susquehannock was married to the Princess of the Iroquois, thus creating a union that ended centuries of conflict. The Chesapeake people, who are given credit in the modern narrative as occupying the Chesapeake in 1607, are described as quite the opposite of the Susquehannock. The Chesapeake people were an Algonquin-speaking woodland people who roamed the land, building temporary wigwams and then more elaborate longhouses. However, the key piece to the Chesapeake history I'd like to focus on is their expelling of another indigenous group directly before the Europeans reached this landscape. We can undoubtedly assume the displaced people were the Susquehannock, who, as we have discussed in other videos, were very methodical in their approach to life, and most likely were not displaced, but rather left seeking trade and further development. The Susquehannock earthworks and the settlements that they created were often permanent, meaning they could come and go as they pleased, moving between their settlements at a moment's notice. And they most likely left the Chesapeake Bay after they had exhausted the local food supply. The other indigenous groups seem to have discovered these Susquehannock settlements and began occupying them. Either way, Norfolk was said to have been the epicenter to one of the largest populations of indigenous people in Virginia, and the two conflicting reports from 1607 of who actually occupied the landscape is also quite revealing. We're told Norfolk was essentially the first tract of land occupied in Virginia besides Jamestown, and yet for some reason, Norfolk wasn't incorporated as a town until well into the 1700s, over 100 years later. Could it be that, for lack of a better term, the Europeans had not fully inherited the settlement from the indigenous? Virginia colony was divided into 4 jurisdictions with the introduction of the ruling body known as the House of Burgesses in 1619. This was all done under the orders of Sir George Yeardley of England, Deputy Governor of Virginia. In 1618, the Virginia Company of London, itself another rabbit hole worth diving into, issued an order known officially as Instructions for George Yeardley, which ordered him to establish the ancient planter system in the area today known as Virginia. The ancient planter system is basically another example of convoluted current narrative plausible deniability. As we're told, land grants were issued by the Virginia Company of London to any person who would travel to the New World to settle in Virginia and remain there for at least 3 harvests. These land grants were the first land grants ever issued in the New World. Essentially, those who accepted the land grants were given 1 share in the Virginia Company of London to be invested and then reinvested over a 7-year period. The Virginia Company of London also forcibly sent planters to Virginia as indentured servants, giving them each 100 acres of land, but forcing them to pay steep prices to rent the land. We're also told the term ancient planter became a derogatory one, used towards any man considered as under the iron thumb of the British Crown. The interactions between the Virginia Company of London and the earliest settlers to Virginia, both free and indentured, became known as the Great Charter. Diving back into George Yeardley, the figurehead for the founding of Virginia, we're told Yeardley led the first Virginia General Assembly in the House of Burgesses in Jamestown on July 30th, 1619. And remarkably, one of the first acts of this house was to regulate the distribution and sale of the newly introduced cash crop, tobacco. And would you believe it? Who is credited with introducing the Europeans to the cultivation of this abundantly successful crop? None other than the lost people, the Susquehannock, who themselves are credited with living a strategically imperial lifestyle, often described in ancient times as similar to Rome, focused on the founding and expansion of cities and the meticulous cultivation of major crops. Later in August of 1619, Yeardley welcomed the White Lion to the harbors of Virginia, trading early indigenous provisions for roughly 20 captured men from Africa. Thus, Yeardley is credited with introducing the slave trade to the New World. Another point of emphasis here is that Yeardley had owned one of the largest plantations in American history located on Mulberry Island. And beyond this, Yeardley is also credited with founding the first major windmill in the New World. While that's interesting enough, more interesting is the fact that many of these lands, the founded plantations and settlements, the structures, often change hands repeatedly throughout the centuries. Yet these creations always seem to stay in the hands of people that had ties to one another and to a much more esoteric history. It's as if the names were simply placeholders to pull attention away from the true mystery of the creation itself. But I digress. The first windmill, for example, a massive achievement founded by Yeardley and the Virginia Company of London, was then transferred to the London Company in 1624. The history is chock full of instances like this where things appear to line up too perfectly for the powers that be. Another thing worth mentioning here is that when naming the jurisdictions in Virginia, Yeardley chose to go with the name city, as opposed to common English monikers of the time. City was a French word that was almost exclusively used in the French language, and the division of Virginia was one of the first times in recorded history that we see the term city being used for an English settlement. Norfolk fell historically into the region known as Elizabeth City. Again, this might be nothing, but to me, it appears like a somewhat important detail. In 1634, King Charles revamped the system and reorganized the entire Virginia colony, adding shire to the end of the city names, meaning that Elizabeth City became Elizabeth City Shire. Elizabeth City Shire included all of the lands that today comprise Hampton, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Suffolk, Portsmouth, and Chesapeake, meaning all three of the largest cities in Virginia today, historically, fell into the same ancient shire. Yet the foundation of Norfolk, as we know it today, can be traced back to one Adam Thorogood. Again, this is just my opinion, but if you've watched my last video, you'll know that a good number of people sent to the New World for the British Crown appeared to come from Norfolk, England, specifically the merchant and market town of King's Lynn. For example, the man who founded New Hampshire for England, John Mason, was also from King's Lynn, and Norfolk has a very similar narrative. In 1622, Adam Thorogood immigrated to the Virginia colony from King's Lynn on behalf of the English crown. By 1636, Thorogood had renamed the shire to New Norfolk County. By 1637, New Norfolk County was divided further into Upper Norfolk, which housed the plantations and ancient earthworks, and Lower Norfolk, which was based around the city. The city of Norfolk then became known as the wealthiest port of Virginia, often called the city of entrepreneurs, and was home to a vast majority of the leaders of the Virginia Company of London. Earthworks? Did someone say earthworks? This is probably the wildest part of this entire narrative. By the end of the 1600s, roughly around 1675, Norfolk founded an absolutely massive 50-acre or 200,000 meter squared earthwork fortress known as the Half Moon. Half Moon was also the name of the ship sailed by Henry Hudson into the Susquehannock-occupied waters when he accidentally reached the New World. At the same time, the Half Moon Fortress itself was said to have been founded on land that was purchased from the indigenous people for 10,000 pounds of cash crop. By 1681, just a few years after the founding of the Half Moon Fortress, the House of Burgesses officially established Norfolk as a town, but it was not officially incorporated until 1705. By 1730, the British New World's tobacco inspection plant was founded in Norfolk, and by 1736, Norfolk received a royal charter to become a borough. By 1765, Norfolk was the trade hub of the Virginia colony and the most economically profitable city in Virginia, complete with the massive Half Moon Fortress mentioned earlier. as well as a multitude of seemingly advanced pieces of construction that dotted the landscape. While Norfolk was said to be the mercantile capital of Virginia as well, the history goes 10 toes up around the American Revolution. Essentially, we're told Norfolk, massive, beautiful, and replete with history, was targeted by John Murray, the royal governor of Virginia, during the Revolutionary War. Because of the massive half-moon fortress and the strategic location, Murray sought to move his capital to Norfolk after retreating from Williamsburg. Yet to capture the city, we're told, Murray unleashed a 3-day barrage on Norfolk, which leveled the entirety of the city, destroying over 800 buildings, or well over 2/3 of the city, including the most ancient sites and fortresses. And if that wasn't enough, the plausible deniability continues by telling us that the Patriot forces then occupied the city after the British, destroying what remained of every last building that stood in Norfolk. Every single one, according to the narrative, was burned to the ground. We're told Norfolk did not rebuild much, if at all, by the year 1804, with much of the city still being in ruins. And those ruins were then occupied by mostly poor or low-income families. That same year, 1804, another great fire was said to have broken out in Norfolk, destroying any parts of the city that had been rebuilt. During the War of 1812, the ruinous city of Norfolk was again targeted and reduced to rubble. To me, it appears there was something deeper here that both sides of the proverbial narrative were attempting to isolate or hide or destroy. And this may be further highlighted when we look at 1832, when a movement was started within Virginia to repatriate freedmen and return them to their homeland. And this led to the founding and the creation of the country of Liberia. Before reading this narrative, I had no idea that Liberia was officially established for this reason, but beyond that, we're told the first president of Liberia was actually a freedman from Norfolk by the name of Joseph Jenkins Roberts. In 1845, Norfolk was finally officially incorporated as a city. Yet by 1855, just 10 years later, yellow fever had reached Norfolk from the ship Benjamin Franklin, which arrived to the harbor from the West Indies. The disease wiped out an estimated 30 to 50% of the population of Norfolk, causing another long stretch of recession in the city, which was only further heightened by the outbreak of the Civil War. By May of 1862, Norfolk was surrendered to the Union, who used the city as a base of operations, which was held under martial law for a majority of the war, leading to further destruction and ruin. Again, it truly appears that Norfolk, like much of Virginia, was purposefully ostracized to erase the true history. For example, the first major railway to reach Norfolk did not occur until 1907, and this was brought forth by the founding of the Jamestown Exposition, a small-scale World's Fair that was held in Norfolk. The exposition was mainly a cover to hold the Naval Review. Again, read between the lines here, but essentially, they surveyed Norfolk at this time and concluded that this was a perfect location to build the largest naval base of any kind in the entire world. Mind you, there's so much abundant ancient history here, things that appear to have been purposefully hidden, that it wouldn't surprise me if this naval base was constructed on or near the ancient site of the Half Moon Fortress. But I digress. Essentially, if we look at the historical timeline, it went Half Moon Fortress, then years of neglect and battles, which reduced the fort to rubble, then more years of neglect, followed by a World's Fair, or Great Exposition, founded on top of this ancient site, followed by the Great Fair, being further covered over by the Naval Air Station Hampton Roads that was founded on the site of the fair. This air station, this naval base, being the largest on Earth. Again, the history then goes relatively dormant besides small issues which focused on social reform as opposed to any major construction projects that would impact the city of Norfolk. We do have The founding of a cornucopia of tunnels and bridges, however, in Norfolk, following the expansion of the interstate highway system in the 1950s and 60s. PETA has been based in Norfolk since 1996, and this appears to coincide with an effort that was made to revitalize and modernize Norfolk, which began in the 1980s and was said to have been completed by the year 2000. According to the narrative, Norfolk's efforts to revitalize the downtown have attracted acclaim from economic development and urban planning circles throughout the country, and the downtown's rising fortunes have helped to expand the city's revenue and to allow the city to gain more notoriously wealthy individuals. Very little, if anything, remains from ancient and historical Norfolk, with the majority of the city that we see today being built well into the 20th century. And yet at the core of Norfolk's history is one that is shrouded in mystery, as the first European colonists who told this history, who wrote this history, were interacting with some of the most mysterious indigenous people of all time. And not only did the myths and legends regarding Norfolk lead to some of this history being very convoluted, but we also have the construction and deconstruction of many pieces of architecture, the founding of many miraculous buildings which no longer survive on this landscape. In seeing Norfolk's history through open eyes, we can begin to separate the true nature of one of the most important strategic locations in the entire Chesapeake Bay. Itself, the bay, home to the very indigenous people who defined early America. In researching Norfolk, we are attempting to peel back the veil and witness the old world of America and all of its glory. Thank you for being here. I'm going to wrap up the video there, but please like, subscribe, and share this video as many places as possible. If you've been impacted by my work or want to reach out to me more directly and support the channel, you can do so here. With Norfolk, we can begin to decipher the routine plausible deniability which seemed to appear in many major narratives throughout history. And the theories regarding Norfolk's prehistory only adds more gasoline to our engine of questioning. And yet, through the oldest photographs we looked at today, we have made a connection which truly most people have never made before. So I hope you have learned something today. If you have, hit the thumbs up button. We will talk about it more in the comment section, and we will talk about it more on the next video.